Hey guys, welcome back. In today's video, we're talking all about being an evening student, what there is to know, the strategies, the approaches, what to expect, tips and advice. And to help us wade through all of this craziness is Bree Schulich. She is a biotechnologist and wellpreneur. So during the day, she works full-time for a biotechnology company in business development. And at night, she's a rising 2L at the George Washington University School of Law. So Bree, thank you so much for being with us.
Yes, thank you, Angela. I'm so happy to be here.
So let's go ahead and dive in and talk about an overview of what an evening student's life sort of looks like from the academic end. So how many classes are you taking? What days of the week do you have class? And how many years is the entire program altogether?
Yeah, absolutely. So for part-time law school, typically at George Washington University, we go to law school for 4 years or 8 semesters plus one summer session. And in terms of the number of classes, we're taking usually 3 classes or an average of 11 credits per semester. And to give a reference of what my 1L year looked like, is we had classes Monday through Thursday in the evenings, of course, from about 6 to 9:30 or 10 p.m. At night. Yeah.
And so personally for you, what does a typical day look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I don't know if any day is typical, but I know exactly what you're getting at. So oftentimes I wake up around 6:30 ish. And one practice that I have been incorporating into my morning is starting the day with a 10-minute morning meditation, which just gets me in the right headspace to take on a typically dynamic and fairly action-packed day. So after that, I love to do a little bit of journaling, and then getting ready for work, which typically begins at about 8 a.m. And so work is, for me, a lot of phone calls, emails, scientific conversations, which I love. And then over lunch, I do typically try to incorporate some form of movement. And so I'm an avid runner. And so when the weather is nice, I'd love to go outside for a run. But also, I enjoy in home workouts that include bar, yoga, Pilates, that kind of thing. Um, and then having some lunch, of course, and signing back on around 1 o'clock and working the afternoon until 5 p.m. Um, and then at 5, that's when I get ready to commute to law school. And for me, that's about a half-hour commute typically, via Metro, Washington, D.C. And then, of course, arriving at law school and having classes about 6 to, let's say, about 10 p.m. in the evening. And then one thing, Angela, that I've found to be very advantageous in my early legal education is to actually stay on campus for an additional hour before going home, just so that I am able to look through my notes, maybe even create some kind of rough outline, and truly try to synthesize that information that I have been exposed to, just because I feel, as many law students, probably very inundated with information, and if I find that if I go directly home, that I'm going to want to go directly to bed. So that's one thing that I kind of learned through trial and error, but has been really helpful for me. And so then I get home and get ready to start it all over again the next day.
That's so incredibly impressive and so incredibly efficient. My days, I don't think have ever looked like that in my whole life, and I am totally envious. That's incredible, and I'm sure it's a necessity having so many demands on your time that by nature of the day you have to be as efficient as you are. Okay, so talking academics and jobs, everybody knows when you head into law school that classes are graded on a curve, and that is what makes law school so competitive, and there's only a certain percentage of A's and B's and C's that can be allocated across the entire class. And so when you're in an evening program, are you graded just against the, for example, 25 people in the evening program? Or are you also graded along with the full-time day students as well?
Yeah, that's a great question. And like you said, the curve is incredibly important. And I'll speak specifically for George Washington University. But for us, specifically for 1L classes, we are graded on the curve with the full time students. And also, our evening classes include the full time students. So the class sizes are a bit bigger, about like 100 people in the doctrinal classes. But that also provides opportunity for us to give our unique perspectives as part-time students, but also kind of get a little bit of that flavor of what that's like, and kind of meet all of the full-time students too. So I think it's a really unique blend. But yes, for the most part, we are graded on the curve with our fellow classmates, which include the full-time students.
Gotcha. Okay. And then in terms of OCI or on campus interviewing, which is where the law firms come to campus and they recruit for the following summer, is the OCI system something that you guys can participate in after your 1L year along with the full-time students? Or do you have to wait until you get a requisite number of classes to then participate in OCI the following year?
hmm Yeah, so for us, we can do both, or rather, either or likely. And so after our first year, you are eligible to apply for sure for on-campus interviews. And in that case, depending upon what you do in the summer, you might have one less class than a typical 1L. And then subsequently, or alternatively, if you wanted to wait an additional year, that typically is an opportunity as well. And so in that case, you might have a padding of one or two additional classes than a typical other OCI interviewee might have. Um, so I think it's kind of the best of the both worlds in that case, and you can really make a decision individualized based on your kind of your career path or what you envision, as well as how your grades come out.
And that's a perfect segue to talk about the next question, which is what are some of the advantages and disadvantages of being in a part time program? Because I know that there's probably a perception of both. And so I'm really interested to hear what your take on that is.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we can start with advantages. And so one thing that I see personally with respect to working full time is that essentially, while you're serving your employer, whoever it might be, or if you're an entrepreneur, through that avenue, you're essentially being paid to professionally and personally develop. And that can look at like a lot of different ways. But one specific thing that I've found very interesting is being able to really network while you're on the job, right? So with your colleagues, with your clients, with your constituents, whoever it might be, you're doing that every day, and it's not something that you allocate an hour a week to do while you're on law school and some firm or some organization is brought to you. It's just kind of a natural evolution as you go through your career. So I found that to be incredibly advantageous. And in terms of disadvantages, or I like to say different advantages for full-time students, um, I think law school, specifically George Washington, do a great job of kind of leveling the playing fields and providing accessibility for evening students to participate in different things. But of course, if there is something like a lunch and learn, for example, during the middle of the day, that's going to be challenging for someone who's working full time to be able to do. But I think as we continue to move towards recordings and live streaming, I think that that's going to really not continue to be a disadvantage, and you will be able to call in remotely or something like that. But that's something that comes to mind for me that is an occasional frustration that I wish I could be at different events at different times. One other thing that I'm continually trying to think through in ways to improve is things like office hours for professors as well. That can be challenging as a part-time student, arriving for me, typically on campus 10 minutes before I need to go to class and dive in. But oftentimes what I found is emailing professors, they're willing to give a 15-minute break during your workday, jump on a phone call and get those questions answered, or staying after class. And so I think there certainly are advantages and disadvantages, and I'm probably coming at it from the perspective of having to try to navigate those and innovate and finding ways around them. because I really don't think that any student, specifically a part-time student, should come in with the mentality of oh, this is going to be disadvantageous to me. Like, how can I find a way to do what I really want to do? Because at the end of the day, we are all in control of our education, and so I really think that it's the power of the person to navigate it. But those are a couple of things that come to mind right now.
I love that. And, just to kind of continue with what you were saying, so many of the evening students, especially obviously ones that come in with jobs, have the thing that everybody in law school is after, right? You go to law school to get a job and to begin your career in a legal arena of some sort. And so to already come in with that, at least a starting place, at least knowing a little bit about what you want to do, have somewhat of a trajectory, have the ability to make money so that you hopefully don't have to go into thousands of dollars of debt or just be able to sustain a lifestyle is so, so neat, and something that I think maybe doesn't even get talked about all that often because the full-time day program is kind of the traditional program, and not all law schools even have an evening program. And so I think you're right. I think that's really, really interesting and beneficial to think through when people are trying to make this decision, to the extent that somebody's on the line between full-time and evening. And so for people who are trying to make the decision between going into a full-time program and a part-time evening program, what was sort of your thought process and your approach to that? And how did you personally decide on a part-time evening program?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I certainly think it's a individualized cost benefit analysis for sure. But for me specifically, um, at the end of my undergraduate degree, I started working while I was going to school full time. And I really found so much value in doing the two in parallel, value being personal and professional development. And so I continued to do that throughout my master's degree. And I think that's an important point perhaps to make, is that I really have been practicing this lifestyle, if you will, of full-time work as well as school for about 4 years now. And so for me, it was a fairly natural evolution to decide to continue on by working full-time and going to law school part-time. But I really did enjoy what I was doing professionally, and I found that I was growing both my skill set, but also kind of shaping my career, or the early portions of my career, while I was gaining education to apply that to what I was doing. And so for me, that was really a compelling reason as to why I wanted to go that route. But then subsequently, as I'm working and able to contribute to tuition financially, that was another incredible incentive for me to try to go to law school with as a few or no loans as possible. And so those were kind of the two big buckets that I thought through. Of course, with the understanding that yes, it's going to take 4 years rather than three. But that was I guess, a sacrifice that I was willing to make. And so thus far, I am very pleased with my decision, and yeah, excited to keep going.
So the last question I want to ask you is, do you have any advice for someone who might be considering a part-time evening law school program?
Yes, absolutely. So, one thing that I think is incredibly important to keep in mind, especially when things get tough, you're in the middle of studying for finals and it's 2 a.m. and you don't think you can go on, but to keep in mind that there have been so many attorneys that have gone before you in a part time program while working full time. And guess what? They've made it, and you can too. And so that's something I tell myself all the time, to be completely honest. And I just find it to be so comforting. And then another thing I think also to think about is law school as a whole is a marathon, but each individual semester, or you can even break it down into midterms, is a sprint. And so when you have that mentality of like, okay, I have 12 weeks to go incredibly hard and get on, my readings done, these exams completed, and then maybe I have a 2 week break or something like that to recuperate and to restore, and then you do it all again. And I thought, for me, kind of breaking that down was really helpful to kind of put everything into perspective. And so, in addition to that, I think it's also important to recognize that first and foremost, we're human, right? And then subsequently, we're law students and employees or entrepreneurs or whatever your work form is. And so, tending to those human needs is absolutely essential to being able to perform your best self. And that's going to look very different to everyone. I like to think about it like in the three M's, so meditation, movement, and mindful eating. And so those are kind of my non negotiables, if you will, in terms of taking care of myself and supporting my own wellness. And you'll find whatever works for you. But to stay true to those and to do, everything in your power to just to be consistent. And it's not always going to be consistent. I oversleep and miss my meditation. I don't always get movement in, but know that if you skip one day, you can start again the next day. And the last thing that I wanted to say is to remember that it's your birthright to feel good and to have fun, despite the intensity that you're about to embark on. And that's going to be very individualized, but I think that goes along with the humanization to incorporate things that you truly enjoy and that bring you fulfillment in addition to hopefully studying as well. And there's going to be a lot of times where people feel down, maybe discouraged, overwhelmed. But if you dig deep enough, you can find something that will brighten your day and encourage you to keep on. And so that would be another thing that as I continue and as I reflect back on my first 2 semesters, that's really something that I hope to take with me going forward throughout the rest of my legal education.
Bree, that was amazing. Thank you so much for sharing all of your experiences being a evening law student. It actually makes me jealous, and I kind of want to go back in time and redo my law school experience and have the same one that you're having, just because it sounds so fulfilling and there's so many components and elements to it. So thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me, Angela. It's been so much fun.
Yeah, absolutely. And guys, please follow Bree to learn all about evening and part-time law school life. Also, all things biotechnology and all things wellness. I'm going to include her LinkedIn and Instagram accounts below, so make sure to give her a follow. And thank you guys so much for tuning in. I'll see you next week. Bye, guys.